Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to our annual family meeting. It's our second annual family meeting, but it's still an annual family meeting. We started this tradition last year. It felt good. It felt right. We're doing it again this year. We are live with our insiders and hopefully going to be joining a lot of folks on their Thanksgiving week or Thanksgiving travels to talk loosely about the news. So we'll stay informed, we'll stay smarter, but maybe take a little break from some of the rigmarole. I love that word of current events so we can actually focus on our own family story this time of year, whatever story you choose, whether it's to spend it with family or friends. I know I've spent quite a few holidays by myself working. That was part of the price you paid when you were a young, new journalist of any kind. A long time ago now, I look back, I'm thinking, wow, it's 20 years. 20 years ago, I was working in a newsroom in New York City. It's a hyper local newsroom, now more available nationwide if you have Spectrum Cable. uh, Eventually bought, and I don't know exactly the ins and outs of this, but it was a hyper local station in New York City, still around, by the way, called New York One. It was one of my favorite news stations. And by the way, all the news stations in New York City, it's still amazing to watch local news in big cities. I still really believe in local news. It doesn't have to be big cities, it just happens to be in New York City. I'm most familiar with those local stations there because I lived there for so long. I really believe in local news. I really believe in those connections and those sources of local reporters. And I remember working in what would be called the pod. So the pod is the writer's pod. It would be basically, imagine like a big open newsroom, sort of like the movies. I mean, really like a trading floor, like a stock trading floor. At this time, it was a big open, huge room. There'd be editing bays and some offices along the side, but everybody was sort of piled in the center into desks. And there'd be the writer's pod where you would sit and you'd come, you didn't have your own assigned computer. You just sit there and there would be a list of different stories that you could grab and start writing. And so that was my job. That was one of my first jobs in journalism in New York City after I went through grad school. I made $12 an hour. Just want to just want to put it out there. You did not get the jobs for the money, which is part of the reason why sometimes I would go on, 13, 14 days of working straight in a row because I also didn't have a set schedule. So maybe I was guaranteed 2 days a week, but there was always opportunity to work more. And I needed to because I needed to pay my rent. And that meant I would work at 2 o'clock in the morning sometimes. Sometimes I would work at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I'd work till 11 o'clock at night. I mean, it was just like all over the place. And I have to tell you, I loved it. I loved it because you sit down, you didn't really know what to expect. There'd be a list of stories you'd have to read in on. And what it would be is a rolling broadcast. So they would add in new stories as they got it, but the broadcast would more or less repeat itself throughout the day. And you add in a new, if they had like 5 or 6 new stories, then the news anchor that was on at the time would read those stories, present those stories, and they would work themselves into the system. And so there was always a deadline to hit. And so it was my responsibility to write. It was also my responsibility to cut short video. So cut a soundbite or cut some B-roll. That's what would be the, extra footage, and package it all up, send it off to the copy editors, which were either sitting right behind me or in front of me, and the producers that would double check it and see if it's done in the right way before it went before the news anchor. So it was a really exciting job. I learned a lot doing that. And in many ways, I'm still doing that for Smarter News. And it's really a lot of our time is looking through stories, reading them, filtering them, deciding, well, if you could only use one soundbite, which one would it be? And it's funny how you grow so much in life and yet still sort of return to your roots in so many ways. Isn't it? Isn't that the truth though for Thanksgiving? That we're living this big life. We're talking about AI. We got the social media at our fingertips. And yet over the next week, we will encounter the story of Thanksgiving and we'll go back to familiar traditions. We may add new ones, but the past is still very much there. The roots of the story are still there. And the way that we may approach them may change. But something interesting to think about. As a young journalist, I worked a lot of those, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. And sometimes it was hard. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that the holidays can be such a joyful time for so many. It's wonderful when you have children. You could see the holidays through their eyes. It is the magic of the holidays. They can also be hard. And so if you happen to be a person that's spending it working or spending it alone this year, I know what that's like. I know what it's like to go home and just put on the television and eat some takeout. And there's little joys in that too, but sometimes it can be hard. So I'm just grateful to spend some time together. So I'm glad to have this new tradition. I'm glad that we don't have to necessarily work on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day unless absolutely necessary. And then I'll be there for you. But I want you to be able to enjoy some time with your families. The concept for this really came from last year. We were in the middle of such a hyper partisan election year. And man, it was a lot. The political cycle is a lot. It doesn't matter if you work in journalism or otherwise. And I could feel the exhaustion from everybody. So I thought, let's do a family meeting. There are those that feel very nervous going into the holidays because we were fresh off the election. President Trump had won, but it had certainly been a wild few months. I mean, think about that. If you think about the last few months of 2024, the back half, we had that pivotal debate where everything changed in the election and Vice President Harris becomes the nominee. We had the assassination attempt. I mean, really, when you start listing off some of the big stories that we've all been through, you can say to yourself, well, this is all why our nerves are frayed and we're a little exhausted because it's been a really heavy news cycle and a lot of really important stories that we've either delivered here at Smarter News or you have encountered. So the family meeting was an effort to bring people together and offer a resource. We can't solve every family debate. I wish I could, but can we be helpful in any way as you go into the holidays? And can we prepare you for conversations? Can we also tie up loose ends as you get into the end of the year? Because we know after Thanksgiving, it's easy to sort of check out, but there's still stories that are really important, but maybe you have questions about, you still feel unsettled about. So can we be a resource for that? And it was a really wonderful time. We had fascinating questions, very difficult questions. But I think we helped. And the feedback we got from that was that it was helpful and it was something nice to listen to during the holiday week. So thank you to our insiders who are joining us live. Thank you to all of you who submitted some amazing questions. I've selected a few of them. I do have hats to send you. I said to everybody that I'm going to send you our limited edition Smarter News hats. We still have a couple of these left. So if you submitted a question, you've been selected, I'll put these in the mail for you because as a thank you, because you're basically giving us you're a content producer. It's a new title. That's what you have right now. So thank you so much for that. It's also really nice to hear your voice. For those of you who are joining us live, if a question comes up and you'd like to just ask it on the live feed, I'd love to get to it for you. We're going to start with a couple really big topics. In fact, before I get to that, I do want to mention just two things that I think are important that are observations that may just be helpful in the way that we're thinking about the year and thinking about media and thinking about our story as individuals and also as a nation. And that's the following. Sometimes with the news, I watch for patterns. So I'm not necessarily watching for new news. I mean, I definitely am. A breaking news headline, absolutely. But I find more and more as the years go on, and I have some experience to build upon, I'm looking for patterns. If multiple members of the administration are mentioning a phrase or a topic, that's an indication that something's going on. If I notice that vastly different people are talking about the same topic, then I think, there's something happened culturally with that. What do we need to know about that? So I'm looking for patterns as much as I'm looking for information. So yesterday, there was an interesting micro pattern. I was listening to one of the podcasts that I like to listen to. I listen to all sorts of different things. In fact, I play a game. I love having when my podcast is listed in my car, it tells you what podcasts you've listened to. And I love it when it's like a really unique group of people that probably would not hang out together normally. That's what I try to do. I try to have my podcast lineup look like a music group from vastly different backgrounds of people that would not normally hang out. That's in my opinion, that's how I know I have a diversity of voices, which is what I want, because I want this diversity of voices in my head to make sure I'm encouraging myself to stay curious. So I was listening to a pop culture podcast. I'm actually pop culture. I don't even know if that's the right way to describe it. I'm going to play some of it for you actually later in the show, but it was interviewing a leading celebrity and the word dignity came up. And I thought that's such an interesting word, dignity, because as soon as I say it, it makes me want to sit up straighter. If you have dignity for yourself or dignity for others, what does that actually look like? And then last night I was at a presentation that was related to a totally different group of people, was not about celebrity. It was actually about culture and civilization. And the word dignity came up too, and human dignity. And I thought this word is coming up and I don't know what to make of it, but I like it. I like the word dignity. And if I think about having dignity for myself or dignity for other people, I do hold myself to a higher standard. And maybe we need to make sure that dignity sort of works its way back into the lexicon. So we're using it a lot more often. If I asked you, did you behave with dignity when you were interacting online or you were out on the streets? If you're at work, you might, I don't know, that gives me an instant sort of adjustment. And I think it's something to strive for and think about. Am I behaving with dignity? Am I giving dignity to other people, even people that I disagree with? What does that actually look like if I am approaching you with dignity before we even have a conversation? So, something that I'm thinking about. The other thing I'm thinking about is the way that media affects the stories that we tell ourselves. And then that affects our reality. That's why news is so important, why I think nonpartisan news is so important, because the stories that we tell ourselves create the boundaries of which we're creating our own story in our own lives. And so we want expansive boundaries. We don't want to be limited. And I was approached online, it was through Instagram, a very thoughtful question about ICE. We're actually going to talk about ICE. It's going to be our first questions. ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, not actually ICE. Although it's the holidays, you might be like, what do you mean, Jenna? On the rocks? Like, what are we talking about? No, I'm talking about the Department of Homeland Security. But it was a fascinating observation. She said to me, I open up my phone and the first thing, and she's talking about social media, opening up Instagram, the first thing I'm seeing all of these videos about ICE. And she said, they're awful. And I don't know what to think of. I'm so alarmed by this, but I'm wondering like why other people aren't as alarmed, because this is all I'm seeing. We had an interesting back and forth about this because that's not what everybody's seeing. So let me just back up. I worked in traditional media. Let's go to local news. Let's go to your local news. At one time you could say, well, I like the Fox affiliate in San Francisco. By the way, it wasn't at the time associated with cable news at all. It was ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox. It was just like, these are just the stations. Oh, I like that news anchor. Oh, I like CBS. And you would know, okay, there's a like slightly different style there. So you probably saw more or less the same stories on local news presented slightly different because the personalities on the air were slightly different. And then we got this moved into cable news, the rise of cable news. So this is a 24-hour news cycle that did not exist before. The CNNs, the Fox Newses of the world. And then let's say you go to a family dinner and you sit down and you know that Uncle Bob watches Fox and Aunt Cindy watches MSNBC, and you realize that they probably are seeing different things on the news. But if you wanted to dip into what they were seeing, you could. You could just watch the channel and understand what they were seeing. Now, all of us are opening up these new distribution channels, which is social media. We literally have no idea what we are all seeing. We are experiencing a completely different story selection. And as these social media channels work as news channels for us now, we can't even step into each other's lane or channel because it is the algorithm working directly for us. So I have no doubt that the person I was communicating with on Instagram is seeing a ton of ICE videos. It might just be something that she has searched or researched in the past. I'm getting a ton of stuff about hormones. I hope that makes you laugh because of this. I'm in my 40s. So when I open social media, it's all about hormones. I'm not seeing anything about ICE videos. And I work in the news. I have a friend, we were talking about this earlier. She recently had a baby. She's like, oh, yeah, I open up social media. It's all about baby stuff. That's all I see. So that's really important to remind ourselves of that we're not only seeing completely different versions of the United States when we walk out the door every day, completely different front porch perspective, but as we're walking around with our little computers in our pocket, we're seeing completely different pictures of what's happening now. And quite frankly, sometimes, and this is the hard thing as a journalist, is that some of what you're seeing is not what's happening now. It's something that happened 6 months ago that's being recycled. Have you had that experience where you go down to a video that looks particularly egregious and then you realize, oh, that's from July? I was going to share that with my friends, but it's not even happening here. It's November. And it's easy to lose track of that, but then it's back in the system again and back in the bloodstream. And so as a journalist, that makes things very difficult because where the public starts swaying to uh, can be difficult to follow. You have to almost track down what you become a detective and trying to figure out, well, what's swelling, rising and falling on social media, which may or may not actually be new news. And so this is really something to be observant of. I don't have a solution for it. My solution is to build smarter news. So you have a place to go for nonpartisan news and a place of solace online. But I think the more aware we are of that, the better we can be about real life interactions because so much of what we're experiencing is so solitary. It's not communal. And that's including what we're seeing, obviously, online. So, just a couple things to think about. Let's jump in. I got a great question from Aubrey. Aubrey, thank you so much. Aubrey jumped on earlier, but she had to run because of work. And her first question gets to the heart of one of our biggest stories of this year. So I thought, let's not waste time. Let's jump in here and we're going to talk about it.
Hey Jenna, it's Aubrey. I am super excited that we are doing the family meeting again this year. It was very helpful last year, and I have no doubt that it will be equally as beneficial this year. So I have a few questions to throw out there. I don't know if any of them are hot kind of topics, but they have been the ones rolling around in my mind or ones in which I feel kind of under-equipped to engage in conversation with. So, first question. I was in conversation with some friends recently, and they were talking about ICE and deportations, and the tone of the conversation was deeply concerning. They, I believe, are more conservative in their political leanings, but they were not at all fans of what they perceived to be going on with ICE and the deportations and rounding up of people who are here in the states legally. And they were using language and referring to Germany in the 1930s and how they feel like what's going on in the United States is very similar to what was going on in Germany during the 1930s. And as a kind of lay historian, is someone who is very interested in World War II history and the context surrounding that. It was alarming to listen to. I didn't really choose to engage in the conversation because I didn't really feel like I had a lot that I could bring to it. So I just listened and asked questions, which, lead with a question. But I felt a little under-equipped, and it got me thinking, like, what is really actually going on with ICE and the deportations? And is it something that we should be concerned about? Or is it just gotten very hyper-political? Like, are people's lives, especially people who are here in a legal way, really being affected? Because if so, like, should we be paying attention to that? So that's question one.
Okay. First of all, did you hear the birds in the background? Because I was sort of mesmerized by that. And Aubrey's asking this really important question. So, Aubrey, I was completely focused on what you had to say. I did listen to your question several times, but every time I'm like, those birds, like they're giving that good symphony in the background. I appreciate that. Aubrey, great question. And so well put. And we're actually going to spend a little time here because I think this is a really important topic. And there's a lot of different threads to pull on it. I don't think anybody has existed in the world over the last several years and has not heard a comparison to Nazi Germany or Nazi acts as a part of the political conversation. And so let's just talk about that for a second. As you were speaking about your love for history, I was thinking about visiting the Anne Frank exhibit in New York City. I did a story on that. By the way, you could watch it on YouTube. I also put it on podcast if you'd like. It's back in May, if memory serves me correct. So it was really, what was great about this exhibit, as poignant as it was and solemn as it was, because what they did is they recreated Anne Frank's annex. So where she hid for so many years, completely recreated it so that we could walk through it. And this is it's just an amazing exhibit. It's the first of its kind here in the United States. It's the first of its kind in the world, but we were seeing it in New York City for the first time. And as part of this exhibit, you wind through the early years of her parents. You find out that her dad came to New York City for a little while before going back to Europe. You're seeing the lives of these people come together, and then you're seeing them come apart at the seams. And that's what makes it so devastating. And part of the exhibit is to see how these small changes start happening. So, there's a concern, oh, you're just going to have, we're just, counting the people. Like it seems so innocuous. Like, oh, there's this person saying these kind of wild things, but like you can just see how it slow rolls into this horrific storm. And obviously, we know what happened with the Holocaust. It was mass genocide, mass persecution, and murder of a very specific group of people with a very specific faith. Two things on that. One, there is a recognition and a realization of the slow roll of this storm that suddenly arrived and seemingly the world wasn't totally prepared for. Like there's still this disbelief, is like, this really happening? What's really happening? Like, what do you mean people are being rounded up and taken to places, concentration? Like, what do you even mean about that? Like, there's a denial process that happens with this. And even with the media of like, well, what's going on here? And speaking just from personal opinion, this is a personal opinion as someone that has watched these comparisons and also loves history and is in the business of storytelling and reporting. There seems to be a very obvious and understandable collective trauma about that. We don't want to miss the signs next time. Like we want to be ready, and we are going to not allow that to happen. Like that, this will never happen again. And we're going to be very vigilant about this. And so that gets applied. You start seeing the comparisons get applied. That said, it is very difficult to make a comparison to Nazi Germany for anything because of the specific nature of the murder. So unless it's exactly the same thing, I find that comparison very difficult and also very difficult to talk about, because what do you then say to someone that makes a comparison to Nazi Germany? Oh, well, it's not really that because it's not really the same persecution. Like it puts you in a weird space of suddenly like defending that we're not in Nazi Germany. Like it's a very difficult, hard conversation to have with people. As soon as that card is thrown, where do you go from there? Which is part of the critique of it by those that receive that criticism, which is like, first of all, the comparison doesn't work. And second of all, the minute that you put that label on somebody, there's no way to shake it. And how do you defend yourself against it? So it's a very difficult comparison. I just want to recognize that. I also want to recognize that just because something is not persecution and murder and a complete genocide of a certain group of people doesn't mean that that's the only way that any government can severely affect someone's life. So I don't want to dismiss what is often trying to be expressed here, which is a question about government overreach, uh, government authoritarianism, the authority of the government overstepping laws and acting independently in a way that is not congruent with American laws, and the effect on someone's life. You don't have to murder someone to ruin their life. And these are where the stakes are. So as a human watching some of these videos of people either getting arrested or the screams and the children and like all of the video that you're seeing, it's hard not to have an emotional reaction. I just want to recognize that for what that is too. So the important thing to, I think, pull out of this and just equip yourself with in general, it's a learning, and this is a learning scale for me too, because I don't know if I really understood some of the power that is provided to federal law enforcement, which is what immigration and customs enforcement is. Remember, ICE is a byproduct of the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Homeland Security has not been around for that long. It's been around since post 9/11. So this is a relatively new, in the grand scheme of things, federal department, and we're talking about federal law enforcement. That means they are different than police. And I want to point out a couple things for you. I have a few notes on this. So, first of all, let's just talk about an arrest. Like, what do you see when you see an arrest? And when it seems aggressive in some cases, what do you need to know about that? What is within the bounds of law? And let me also add this caveat. In the United States of America, federal law enforcement, just like your local law enforcement, has to also follow the law. And if you look up cases over the last several years, I mean, you can find a myriad of them where both federal law enforcement and local law enforcement are successfully prosecuted for overstepping their authority and breaking the law. So the law does work also to make sure that those enforcing the law are following it. So, an arrest involves law enforcement taking someone into custody and requires probable cause the person has committed a crime, whereas detention involves a temporary hold to investigate when there is a reasonable suspicion, a lower standard than probable cause a person has committed a crime. Can an immigration officer arrest a U.S. citizen? Yes, they can arrest a U.S. citizen without a warrant if the person commits a criminal offense, not just an immigration related offense in their presence, or they have reasonable grounds to believe the person has committed a felony, not just an immigration related felony. So that's something really important to know. Immigration and Customs Enforcement doesn't need a warrant to go into public spaces. They don't need a warrant to confront someone. They can have probable cause for this. And we have to be a little careful with probable cause and reasonable suspicion and what qualifies it as that. But I think this is important to think about when you're seeing videos that are just showing an arrest and you don't see what happened an hour before and you're not seeing what happens afterwards. That gets a little bit tricky because we don't know what took place. And as in preparation for this conversation, I was looking up, well, what does Immigrations and Customs Enforcement say? And what do immigration advocate groups say? What sort of advice are they giving to people about how to interact with ICE? One of the things is they're suggesting immigration advocates don't open your door. The one area where Immigrations and Customs Enforcement needs a warrant is in your private home. They can't just come into that. Or typically private businesses, however, we have to be a little careful with that. They have, I'm looking down here because I wrote a note on it. There's work site audits. They can do a work site audit. Doesn't require a warrant, something different. So they can go into a work site area and ask questions. Now, whether or not you need to answer this question, what does that look like? It can get very specific to the case. Broadly speaking, when law enforcement asks you to do something, you don't have to speak without a lawyer. I mean, your constitutional rights that are here for the United States of America apply. And even this sometimes comes into a question of like, and I know I had it. Well, do all constitutional rights in America apply to everybody here, even when you're not a citizen of the United States? The answer is yes. So yes, they're supposed to apply to everybody. You still need to work with law enforcement. So if you're resisting arrest or you're acting in a way that is leading to further suspicion of questions, if there's any sort of conflict, you're putting yourself in peril. That's true of really any sort of interaction with law enforcement. Yes, you have, a right to say, well, you have a warrant to search my private property, my car, for something like that. But if you're locking the door of your car, you've been pulled over and you're asked to get out of the car, you're asked to show your driver's license, you're asked for something and you're purposely not doing it, and law enforcement is becoming more aggressive. And what we capture is the law enforcement, and I say we and social media capture the law enforcement officer dragging someone out of the car, and that's all you see. That can be very tricky to try to untangle because we need to know what happened before, what's going on here, what's the probable cause, what's the reasonable suspicion, what is all of that. So this is going to be an ongoing story because of the power that is afforded to federal authorities, federal law enforcement. That's also brushing up against these questions about constitutional rights and what does that look like? And we're not necessarily all working from the same paradigm of understanding of what the government is empowered to do. The answer is the government is empowered to do quite a few things when it comes to immigration. And it looks slightly different than a typical arrest that we would see, see on a cop show. Even those can get a little dicey, can't they? So I think it's important to keep that in mind. I also, as a story that I'm going to be watching in the future, is that although we've seen a lot of conflict and a lot of questioning, I'm very curious to start seeing more numbers about how many of these interactions have led to removals and deportations. And what do those numbers actually look like? So, are some of these operations in different areas, different cities, Chicago or New York and California, are these one and done? Is this Immigrations and Customs Enforcement going into these areas, doing these massive sweeps? They're gathering information, they're gathering some criminals, but they're also kind of taking stake of what's happening. If understanding people's legal status. One of the things that was posted just today is a job opening under the Department of Homeland Security for immigration judges. Let me see if I could pull it up for you, because when I saw it, I was like, wow, that's something you don't see every day. By the way, it pays, let's like $200,000. So, in this job market, I'm always like, well, let's take a look at that. Here, let me show it to you, because this gives you an idea. It's one thing to get people into custody or detain them for questioning. It's another thing to process and to understand, like, where does this go next? So this is from the Department of Homeland Security, Christy Nome. And I just want to click on this one post, and it says this: if you are a legal professional, the Trump administration is calling on you to join the Justice Department as a deportation judge to restore integrity and honor to our nation's immigration court system. Salary ranges from just under $160,000 to just over $207,000, 70 nationwide locations, potential for full-time remote work. This has been a major problem for multiple administrations, not just the Trump administration, the Biden administration. I mean, go back several years. Even if you have people that are in detention of some sort, you can't keep them. There's nowhere to, like, where are you going to put them? They're not going to prison. They're not guilty of a crime, but they need to be seen by a judge to understand their future. And that's part of the reason when you have 300,000 people coming across the border that are encountered by federal law enforcement, there was a process where Border Patrol, Immigrations, Customs Enforcement was basically having to make decisions on the spot. Okay, here's your paper returned for court time at a later date. They don't have the resources to do something with these folks. And these folks are claiming asylum. So under US law, if it looks like a valid claim, they're allowed to pursue that once they're in the country. And that's part of the reason why so many people were released at the border. There was not enough judges making those decisions in the moment and following a legal process here in the United States. So I'm curious to see where the story goes from here. Aubrey, I understand the heightened emotion with this. And I think understanding a little bit of the background may be helpful. Maybe you can send your friends this podcast, it's hard to be the person to jump in and be like, well, here's the thing. Federal law enforcement does operate with a certain amount of power, and we're not seeing usually the complete story. And this gets very difficult. And there was a broader question here, which is, what is the right path for those that are in the country without legal status? Is everyone treated the same? Where if you do not have legal status, you do not have a valid asylum claim, even if you've been in the country 5, 10, 20 years, you cannot stay. Does it have to be very black and white like that? Or are there different shades for how this should be handled? Can you have a sponsor similar to a work sponsor? Can someone vouch for you and talk about how you've been a contributing member to the community? So that's a hard question to answer, and perhaps an interesting one to ask. Like, how do you make those decisions? What is the American way? And it's a tough one. It's a tough one to tackle. So I hope you find that helpful. Let's go on to, well, I'm wondering how difficult we want to go. We have a couple different great questions. This actually will lead us in nicely. I had an anonymous question that was sent on Instagram, but don't worry, I'm going to get her address for a hat, because this sort of falls in nicely to a question about not understanding a different point of view. And this is a new phrase that we learned this year. So take a listen to this.
Hi, Jenna. Thanks for the opportunity to ask a question. And not that I'm competitive or anything, but I'm going to try and make it good because I really want a hat. I'd like to understand better the relevancy of the King's protests. I realize people have an opportunity to protest, it's their right. It's the concept of no kings. Every administration makes judgments, decisions, take actions, and we don't see protests like that. I don't also find that they are as innocent as it appears. Many times there's violence, but yet that's not what we see in the news all the time. We always see how it was peaceful, but I think equally as much it's not. So I need to understand it better, because if it comes up, I'll probably say things at the table like, they're ridiculous. So
I appreciate your honesty. I mean, can you just see that? It's, scooping the mashed potato. I think they're ridiculous. I mean, that's a way, like, that may not go well. It might not, it might be difficult to have a, calm dinner from there. But I do think there's a couple of things that you're touching on there that are really important. So thank you for that. The No Kings protest is a new movement that we saw this year. And it comes from, I think the background is really important. So I'm sorry, I'm coughing a little bit. So I just took a big gulp of water and now I'm burping it up. I mean, this is what's really happening. Okay. This is life. This is what's taking place. What are you going to do? I may have another coughing fit. And if I do, I'll put myself on mute just for a second. But, 'tis the season. Here I am. Here I am just struggling through taking vitamin C, all the things that we're trying to do just to survive out here. All right. So the No Kings protest, where this all came from. President Trump is new in office. He's doing all this different stuff, right? He's getting ICE out there. He's making changes. He's got Doge going hot. Like, it's like full blast. The Trump administration is racing to start implementing things. So we're getting into spring, into summer, and it's President Trump's birthday, which happens to coincide with Flag Day. And there's the early plans were there's going to be this military parade, which many associate a parade with military display of military might, very much relate that to authoritarian dictators like those in Russia, China, North Korea. And so that was the critique coming at President Trump, which is like, wait a minute, it's your birthday and we're going to do this military parade thing? Like, that's like, is this for you? Like, what are we doing here? Like, do you just want fireworks? Like, what's happening here? So, President Trump has a different style of leadership. Surely it's very unique to him. And also this idea of presentation and change. And clearly it's something that he's moving forward with when it comes to the look of the White House. Even things like raising a large flagpole is something that he's putting his stamp on Washington, D.C. So this is something that he did and ended up doing. And in response to this, there was an organization. It was really several different Democrat advocacy groups that said, you know what, this is like basically the president's behaving like a king. We're going to have a No Kings protest. So President Trump can have his military parade, but we're going to do a No Kings protest. And you know what? This is going to be a grassroots effort. We're going to have in different places around the country. And that's actually how it started. So it was parallel to the day of that happening. And it was greeted with some success. In fact, because this was also, we're also seeing a lot of the anti-immigration uh, law enforcement protests, anti-immigration policy protests. There's some momentum with this too. So now we're seeing protests in multiple different cities. In some cases, they're small. In some cases, they're big, but this takes place. Okay. Then what happens is the organizers, again, still a group, sort of this, I don't want to say this nebulous group, but it's this, there's not like, oh, this is the one group that's like doing this. It's a collection of groups. They are continuing these protests, and there's another one, and it's in October. These protests are bigger. This is where we actually did more coverage on Smarter News and used some of your photos from those of you who attended these protests. And I love sharing some of the perspective from people that were there. They brought their children. They came with signs. And in general, it was a protest that was rejecting President Trump's policies, which again are associated with federal overreach. Although we have to, as just take a step back, the other side of that is that that's debatable. It sometimes what I'm noticing about the Trump administration is that, number one, there's a different style, right? The way that President Trump leads, the way that he speaks, the way that he moves in the world and his administration, they're moving with force, they're moving quickly, and they're not going to wait and be like, you know what, we're going to do a legal review of that. And we're going to let's take a couple months and do it. No, they're just going to go. And if they're challenged legally, they're going to, which they have been in many ways, then they're going to handle that. But they're going to, they'll have to go through that path of going through the process, the legal challenge. So there's there's a style here that is giving the impression to critics and those that don't like President Trump, and this is the way that they feel. I'm not saying it's just a style. I just think that sometimes a little of these things are mixed up. There's a style of leadership that people don't like, and also a policy that they don't like, and so they're hitting the streets. What I think is important about this, and why we really need to sit up and pay attention to it, is that this movement has grown. It is definitely more progressive, but at Smarter News, we received notes from those that voted for President Trump that were joining these protests. That's really important. So you're seeing that people are mobilizing. I mean, to get up, I mean, can we just have a frank conversation to get you out of your house on a weekend and have you go out into the street to walk a couple miles? Like, what, I mean, in your busy life, that matters. When you see people that are doing that willfully want to do that, and are like, we're going to make time for that, we got to pay attention to that. But here's the bigger question, because no King's protest is one thing. Talking about how much you don't like President Trump is one thing. It's something entirely different to talk about who is the person that embodies the anecdote to President Trump. So who are the candidates on the left, maybe independent too, that will rise over the next several years and challenge President Trump's policies effectively, and this very robust group of young politicians that the Trump administration has working with them. You have Secretary Rubio, you have Secretary Hegseth, you have Vice President Vance. You have this young group of people that can continue to have a leadership role in the Republican Party and the conservative movement for a long time. On the left side or the independent side, when I ask that question, it's not as easily answered. I don't get easy answers in Smarter News. And that would be a very interesting question if no King's protest comes up, if someone's talking about being at one, likes it, wants to talk about it. I'm very curious, who are they inspired by? To join a crowd because of a thought process is one thing, a platform. In general, we don't like what's happening, so we're going to come in and come together. I'm not dismissing that. I'm just saying this, but you're kind of behind. There's many different ways that you could join and you can become part of this club. It's something different to say, oh, I really believe that Zohran Mamdani in New York City is the future of the Democrat Party, and where he goes, I go. That's a totally different thing. So that's what I'm very curious about, and could be a really interesting conversation. Like, let's say, you know, something unfortunate happens, and the leadership of both parties right now is tainted, meaning that there's an issue, something happens, there's a scandal. I mean, one can think of a few right now that can discredit people. And we need new people to lead both. What do those people look like? Who comes to mind? Who are you like, oh yeah, it is, Senator Chris Murphy, Senator Cory Booker. It is, who is that person that can lead that movement? Because then that actually moves into political strength. Right now, it can be described more as like a cultural movement, but can it be funneled, like, if the No Kings group starts collecting money, whose campaign are they funding? Like, who are they putting it behind? Vice President Harris? Gavin Newsom, the governor of California? How does it move from the streets into targeted, specific candidates that can represent that group of people? So it could be a really interesting question, and one that might get you into, like, I don't know, maybe like a thoughtful conversation about the future of America, you know? So that's where I would actually take that question. Let's go to what Barbara had to say. Hey, Barbara, I see you live. So let's go ahead and move on to your question.
Hey, Jenna. I don't have a pressing issue that I'd like you to address as much as I do a more general question. What do you think is the path forward to overcoming our bent to be polarized on all the things? To provide an example of the silly variety, Bob thinks decorating for Christmas in November is enjoyable. Susie thinks that November should be reserved for solely giving thanks. In an attempt to elevate their opinion to the winning one, they spar via comments on social media. How do we overcome Christmas is 2 months versus Christmas should only be 1 month to get to a place where we can recognize Bob's love of the Yuletide season, as well as Susie's adoration for the season of giving thanks, and appreciate that they are each trying to do their best to bring beauty and joy into the world for themselves and others? How do we move on from polarization to loving one another the way we want to be loved? That's my question. As always, thank you and everyone at Smarter News for all you do. You serve us well, and I am grateful. Happy Thanksgiving.
Barbara, what a great message. You always ask the easiest questions. No, I'm just kidding. You're like, how do we bring about world peace? That's honestly, that's what we're talking about. How do we get in peaceful coexistence with each other? What does that even look like? Why do we care? Why do we actually care about when someone starts decorating for Christmas? The only issue I have is when people start putting out their Halloween decorations. Like when you walk in September into Home Depot or Home Goods and it's like Halloween, I'm like, too early. I can't do the pumpkin spice just yet. I'm going to need it. I get aggravated, but I don't lash out online because of that. I love what you said about everyone trying to do their best. I think that's ultimately what people are trying to do. And in another day and age, we would not have a window into the lives of these other people that are doing different things than us that we really don't really care that much about, don't know. And then have an opinion on. I mean, I want to bring you behind the scenes a little bit here with this question about what I see at Smarter News, because I do think it's fascinating and it's taught me a lot, although I can't admit that it doesn't make me upset sometimes. Let's say we put something that's controversial. It doesn't even have to be controversial. It could be anything, quite frankly, that we put on social media. It's usually the same about 200 accounts that will comment. In fact, recently I put something up that was a media commentary that was related to Jeffrey Epstein, but it was really a media commentary about editorial judgment. And the people that DMs me were like, I just don't feel comfortable commenting publicly, but I have this to say. The amount of direct message comments that I get is so exponentially larger than the amount of comments that are publicly happening on social media. It's like, it's not even comparable. It's not even the same. Like, it's so heavy. It's so much. But if you looked at my account, and it depends, if you look, and I say my account, the Smarter News account online, you would maybe even have an idea of who our audience were based on the comments, but it does not reflect the type of conversation that's happening behind the scenes. So much is happening behind the scenes and we don't really even acknowledge it. So I just wanted to share that because I think we think that what we're seeing is representing the whole story, and it's really not. There's a lot happening behind closed doors. When I say it out loud, it sounds so obvious. But I know myself, I'll look at something online and be like, "Oh, what are people saying in the comments?" And then you see it and you think that's the conversation, but it's just the beginning of the conversation. So I think just understanding that everyone's trying to do their best. And I also have taken a different stance on different political points of view. When I start stripping away different, way people feel about different really, really tough topics, I realize for the American community, typically everyone is just looking at freedom and liberty in a slightly different way. So if you look at someone that's disagreeing with you and say, "Oh, well, they just have a different view of what it means to be free." Like, for example, healthcare is a great example of that. There are those that really believe in government healthcare. We think that government healthcare could provide more consistent coverage, more affordable pricing, and more accessibility, and all those things. And the critics of that could be like, government gets involved, and it's going to get crazy. This is anti-American. It's anti-free market. You're anti-American. You're anti-free market. And the person that wants the government healthcare is like, no, I just don't wanna worry about healthcare. Worrying about healthcare is actually not allowing me to be free. Like, I want the freedom of this stress in my life. And if I could break free of that, I have more personal liberty if I don't have to worry about this. It's not that I want the government in my life. I'm not asking for the government. I just want to be free of it. I want to be able to pursue, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what I want. And I can't do it when I'm under these pressures. So when you start looking at it like that, instead of looking at it like, oh, you know, these conservatives, they just want to, take away the government healthcare, but let's just stay with healthcare because it's a little bit easier and not quite as, I mean, it's emotional, but not quite as emotional as some other issues. It's not that the conservatives believe like you will be more free if the government is out of your life. They don't, that's a conservative way of thinking of like less government, more individualism, more free market. That makes you more free. But another person's like, no, more support from the government, more ease of living makes me more free. And so when I start looking at it like that, then it takes me out of the issue a little bit. And then I can reattack the issue and see what each side is actually pulling on for that particular moment in time. But that's been helpful to me because I realized, oh no, everyone just like everyone is genuinely like fighting for their freedom. It's just they'd have a different way of thinking about what that looks like. And once again, when we say the word liberty, we think everybody thinks about it the same way. No, it means to be free. But what does that mean like to you? And that's why we have political parties that are debating about that. So one way that I look at it. All right. Great question here from Christina. And then I'll also move on to the live chat a little bit and then get you on your way so you can do some other things for the holiday season. So Christina, thank you so much for your question. Here it is.
Jenna, thanks for holding the family meeting. Love it. So I'm not necessarily nervous about this, but I do feel like it comes up a lot. It's people questioning where I get my news. And what's interesting is I really try to go to primary sources, and then I look at a spectrum from almost 8 to 10 different sources, to be honest, including Smarter News, of course. And so it's an odd thing to have people question or make assumptions about my news consumption without asking. And then when I respond and say, oh, you know what? I actually try to look at a variety of perspectives. And I even, look up the bill or watch C-SPAN or watch things for myself. And people can't fathom that I have arrived at my own opinions and done my own, at times, thorough research. And just make assumptions about that. So curious your thoughts on that. Of course, I tell about Smarter News, but it's an odd thing to have people tell me I must be misled because of my opinions, even though I try to have a broad spectrum. So curious how you respond to that.
Christina, you know how to fire me up, okay? Because I hate that when people are like, well, so where do you get your news? What are you going to do with yours? Like, what are you, it's like so dismissive. Oh, you must be reading that other site that doesn't have the right information. I have the right information. And you're like, oh my gosh. Like, I get that question a lot, by the way. Well, where do you get your news? I'm like, everywhere. Where do you get your news? I get really defensive. I can't help it. I can't help it. I do. I'm always like, then I'm like, okay. I really like the Associated Press Newswire. I like go through I feel like I have to list out the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. I often reach the San Francisco Chronicle, the Chicago Tribune, the Miami Herald. Like I'm trying to earn their like favor, like 5 gold stars, like to prove that I actually read a lot of different things. So Christina, I totally appreciate it. By the way, Christina does do a lot of research and I am impressed by you regularly, Christina, by the amount of different stuff that you find and things that you flag for us. So thank you for being a member of this community. I really appreciate it. She also is like, Christina occasionally will be like, Jenna, have you thought about this? And I'm like, good one, Christina. Thank you. So I appreciate that. And by the way, I really do through those direct messages. One of the things just getting back to that, some of you are commenting, you can't believe what people say online. It is true. I mean, the things that people say online to me or just in general to the world, to an account that is associated with their name and where they live is so insane to me. I never lived or existed on social media that way because I always have been using it as part of really a business. I have a personal account. You can follow me, Jenna Lee USA. I don't know. I think my last post was like 2 years ago. I'm trying to be better about that. I kind of forget myself in in the social media universe. I need to do better. Just one more thing, to add to your plate. Just try to be an Instagram star. But I just would never, ever, ever say the things that people say online. It's so shocking. So yes, it is true. The thoughtful messages that come into our DMs are not only useful for me as a journalist because they're asking questions or sharing perspectives that I maybe would not consider or brush up against, but most people are incredibly kind and so thoughtful and so appreciative and so much fun. And that's where I choose to live when it comes to smarter news, is through that. It can be very hard for me. Sometimes people are like, why don't you police the comments more? I don't know if that's really, first of all, that's a full-time job. Second of all, I don't want to censor things unless there are, really inappropriate things said. And then sometimes I will, because I don't want that to be part of the smarter news community, but it's a little bit difficult to know what to do. So I do think with this question, Christina, it's really tough and I get immediately defensive. And I think it's better to just be as curious as you possibly can be. And also just say what you say, which is like, oh, I really like a variety of different things. By the way, have you heard of Smarter News? Oh, by the way, have you ever just like put on C-SPAN like at night? It's super interesting to hear different perspectives, or like, oh, you know what I really like recently is this, or I've listened to these two different podcasts because I like both sides. I think that the best thing is to not be defensive about it, but as you can tell from my response, I get extremely defensive about it. So it's better to be just curious. That curiosity over commentary really matters. And I do think that we are developing something special here. So I would always invite someone to check out Smarter News. Very seldom do we have people that come to Smarter News, like a friend invites them, that person gets a negative feedback. A lot of times it's, oh yeah, it's pretty interesting. So I hope we can provide a space for that. And I actually had a really cool interaction. And I wanted to share it with you because it was with a friend of um, a friend of mine, like a relatively new friend in the course of life. Oh my gosh, by the way, I just have to share this because this may be our new thing. Sorry to get distracted, but this is a personal story, so I want to really pay attention. Rachel says, can we get a t-shirt with "Where do you get your news"? Are we going to do it? We should do it. And then have smarter news. Rachel, I'm going to reach out to you to get your address. I'm going to send you some concepts. Did we just find out what we're doing next year for a tagline? Where do you get your, but we have to say it like kindly. Where do you get your news? Not where do you get your news? So we'll have to be like, nice tone, smarter news. Okay. I love that. Oh gosh, we're lighting up. The board is lighting up. We found it. We've stumbled upon it. I love it. I'm with you guys. You're geniuses. Has anyone told you that you look cute today and you're super smart? I just want to say it for the record. Okay, let me tell you this really heartwarming story and then I'm going to leave you alone. So I have a friend, a relatively new friend in the grand scheme of things, but someone that you meet and you're like, you love them. You're like, this is a really great friend. I love and respect her so much. She's so much fun. We laugh like crazy. And I saw her in the office. I've met her brother before, but I don't know him as well. And I run into the both of them together. We're chit-chatting about a million different things at the same time. It's like I don't even know kind of how we stumbled into this. But her brother, who I don't know very well, as I mentioned, like haven't had like really in-depth conversation. I don't know what political perspective he follows or likes or any of that. He said, "Oh, I listened to your Jimmy Kimmel broadcast." And he said, it was really it was a compliment. I don't like not direct quoting someone, even people that are in my personal life. I'm like, I would like the exact words because it was so kind. And basically, they both told me that they were having a lot of trouble talking about that story, and that the way that I was able to break down, well, some people heard this when Jimmy Kimmel said this, and other people heard this. And it's a change of like one word and one tone. And this is how it landed differently for different people. And they said, this, when they both were they were arguing, then my friend sent her brother our podcast. He listened to it, and then they were able to have a conversation. And I love this story so much. First of all, because I really respect these people. They're really smart. I know they really are paying attention to the news. I know they have a lot of news resources. So that meant a lot to me to just know that I could be part of that, but that they were able to then talk And that's the way the news is supposed to work. And I only knew about breaking down some of his commentary, Jimmy Kimmel's commentary that way, because of the feedback that I also received from the Smarter News community, because you all had heard it slightly different. And if you want to go back to the broadcast, it's right at the beginning when we talk about this, because it's very hard if one person heard one thing to consider the other one. You're not going to really automatically do that. And so this is the way that news gathering works. It's about being able to present the news in a way that doesn't feel like an assault. And unfortunately, as I watch my peers in journalism, it feels like an assault constantly. Like, that's not the way you talk to people in real life. I'm not going to talk about ICE and yell at you. I'm going to say, listen, here, let's walk through a couple things. Okay. I'm not trying to, explain away what policies are taking place. I'm just trying to explain them. Sometimes the feedback that I get is like, oh, well, you tried to explain that, you're legitimizing it. And that just shows how polarized people have become, which is that if you're not angry talking about a certain topic, then you must be agreeing with it. But that's not news. And I will stand by that. Like, that's not actually news. We need to present the news, particularly in this time in history, in a way that feels like a conversation of someone that you can trust, because everybody continues to just yell, or their tone. And this is a tougher thing to express. I can see it whether it's the kind of the major networks or on podcasts. Let's say someone's presenting something about President Trump and they say it like, President Trump today said, like they do, like it's like a way that they're looking, a look in their eye, the way that they're addressing the camera. It's so ingrained in the way that they're presenting the news. They can't help themselves to be more disciplined and just say, here's what's going on. Here's one side, here's another side, here's something to consider. And I think it's really important for us to continue to provide that space at Smarter News. So thank you for your support when it comes to that. And thank you for also being a place where we can question things and have multiple conversations about, hey, what does the King's protest mean anyways? What about this ICE stuff? What about this comparison to Germany in the 1940s? Like, it's hard to ask those questions and be brave to do so, because in this day and age, it feels like if you say the one wrong word, you can be chastised forever. And I don't agree with that. It's curiosity over commentary. The ability to ask a question is fundamental to our liberty, no matter which way we see freedom. It just is. So we have to continue asking questions. The minute that we don't, the very moment that we're giving up a little bit of our ability to make up our own mind. So we need to continue to do that. And I really am grateful. Thank you for staying with us, staying with Smarter News for yet another year that's been tumultuous and like a lot going on. And we're a small and mighty team. I'm so grateful for our team at Smarter News, Stephanie and Amy and Megan and Carly and Kelly. Kelly had a new baby this year, new addition. Courtney. We have so many people that have helped support us this year, sometimes in smaller ways, sometimes in huge ways. And I'm really excited about what's to come. I'm not giving up completely. We have a couple weeks left of 2025. Okay. So like, this is not like goodbye for 2025, but it's a chance to show some gratitude. And I'm especially thankful for all of you that have helped build this community. Without you, it literally doesn't matter. I'd just be talking to myself like I am most of the time. I mean, I don't mean to be too honest, but I mean, a lot of time it's just me and me talking to me. So thank you for being here and being supporters and believing in the mission and being part of something different. I know of really no other place when it comes to news on the internet. Does that sound old fashioned? Like on the internet in the world, where there's multiple perspectives that actually exist in the same space. And I'm really proud of what we've created. And I'm really excited about continuing to grow it and figure out how all the puzzle pieces really work together. I think we've already figured out that we have a new merch. We have a new merch thing. I can't wait. I'm going to put that on a shirt today, just so we know. We also have some really cool ideas, by the way, for some merchandise and for some branding in the new year. And I'm really excited to share that with you. I'd love to bring you in, by the way, for a little focus group. Maybe we could do that. That would be really fun to get your, here's kind of what we're thinking for next year. So yes, we are going to be delivering news next week. We have a bunch of historic uh, posts that I think is really important. One of my favorite facts about Thanksgiving is that the first Thanksgiving had a lot of seafood likely. I don't eat seafood at our Thanksgiving meal. We always had gnocchis that my grandmother would make because my Italian side gnocchis or fresh raviolis that would be mixed in with a turkey and gravy and everything else. Not mixed in, but on the table. I'm sure you have something that you have that's very unique to your culture. But I don't have seafood. But the likely scenario is there's quite a bit of seafood that was served. Eel was apparently on the menu for the first Thanksgiving. We don't have that in a can, you know. So I like to remind us of some of those different historical moments. So we'll have a few posts. We'll pay attention to the news. I'm going to be traveling on Monday. So we're not going to be doing a live scoop broadcast. It's where I'm going to actually place this video as well so that if you missed it, we have another opportunity. And of course, if something happens with the news, I always have a way of making sure that we're on it. And I like to say we take Thanksgiving off, but we don't really. We just don't have a live broadcast. So I'm working on that. I'm working on taking more time off, but it's very, very hard to do when you run a company. So really appreciate you guys. Love you so much. So grateful for you. Thank you for your great questions. I'll make sure you get your hats out next week. And also, just as a way to support Smarter News as well, we are going to put together a couple smarter items on gift guide lists. Gifts for her, gifts for kids. If you have any thoughts and ideas, you could always email us. If you have a small business you'd also like to include, happy to do that. We know what it's like. And that's going to be fun. And so if you shop through our links, so something to check out, if you're doing some Black Friday shopping, I will make sure to put our storefront in the show notes here. So let's say you're thinking about doing it, peruse it through Smarter News. We are actually linking up with a lot of big brands, and just using our link gives us it could kick back a couple dollars to us. That really adds up. And it's a way that you get what you want and you help support Smarter News. And it's like a no-brainer. So thank you for considering that if you're doing some shopping. And I'd like to tell you that I'm not doing any shopping, but if you saw the number of packages that have already arrived at our door and number of returns I did this week, then you would know differently. Why does that happen? Here's the thing. I can shop in person and then I still return it. What do you think that's about? I don't know. Anyhow, it's great to see you guys. Oh, I'm going to leave you with this. I'm going to play us out with a quick soundbite. When I was talking about a pop culture podcast. Do you know the writer Glennon Doyle? She's written a few different books. Most recent, I believe, is Untamed. And she has a podcast. And one is it's called We Can Do Hard Things. Uh, by the way, on the political spectrum, definitely more left leaning and progressive. But I love listening to their podcast. And I have their podcast next to like checking in on what Tucker Carlson is doing. I just create these strange bedfellows on my podcast link. So I do like listening to a lot of different things. Anyhow, there's been a few conversations that they have had on this podcast that I just have really appreciated. So this week, Wicked is coming out. I'm recording this on Friday. I believe it's out today. The next installation, the sequel, what would we call it? Second part of the movie. And Cynthia Erivo was on their podcast because she has a new book out as well. Busy lady. I actually can't wait to read the book. And in part because of what she said here. I want to just play this for you and then I'll send you on your way. But take a listen to what she said when she was saying one of the things she finds that is a little different about her compared to other people in the workplace.
I ask why a lot. And I think that really freaks people out. I question things. And I think people aren't used to a person going, why? I don't understand. Can you explain that to me? Why would you say that? Well, what does that mean? But genuinely wanting to know the answer. I think often we hear why or what does that mean or I don't understand as an attack.
Yeah.
Like I've said something wrong. So how come you don't understand immediately? But I actually genuinely am okay with not knowing the answer. So I'll ask for it. You know, I also don't mind if you say, I don't know. Then I go, okay, well, we'll figure it out then.
And isn't that the truth? When someone asks you why, or is like, again, What news source do you use? Or it feels like an attack in this day and age when really it should be always met with, oh, that's interesting. Here's why. Or here's why I think it's why. Or I'm not actually sure about that. And I love the way that she put those words together. And I thought it was really powerful. So never forget, asking questions is often better than adding a comment. And that's something that we can always use, whether it's the holiday season or any time of year. Curiosity over commentary always gets you more information rather than less. And when you fill the conversation with your commentary and your opinion first, you lose some ground because you haven't really totally maybe fleshed out why a certain person feels the way that they do. And maybe there's an incredible backstory that you're just on the edge of learning. So just something to think about as we're going into the holidays. I know sometimes easier said than done, but I hope you have a great one with your families, wherever you are. And thank you for your support of quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Happy Thanksgiving, guys. And I'll see you next year for our 3rd annual family meeting. Talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news, and we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community Scoop, to shopping our gear at our Smarter Shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at Smarter News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.